Germany and Sweden now back Canadian defense tech, turning pressure into new jobs and lasting influence. Welcome to Canada Next.
Tonight, tariff threats from the United States collide with Europe's billion-dollar bet on Canada.
Breaking tonight, while Donald Trump threatens Canada with tariffs, Europe just handed Ottawa a billion-dollar answer. Germany didn't hesitate. Sweden didn't wait. And what happened next reveals exactly why Canada's defense strategy is about to shift dramatically. Tensions are escalating in North America right now. Trump threatened 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, demanding Ottawa submit to American economic pressure. Wall Street assumed Canada would cave. Washington believed leverage would force compliance. But something extraordinary just happened in Ottawa that changes everything. Because while Trump was threatening, Europe was investing. And the timing, absolutely devastating for American negotiators. Stockholm, November 19th, 2025. Sweden's King Carl XVI Gustaf and Queen Sylvia stepped off their aircraft at Ottawa International. But this wasn't just a ceremonial visit. Standing beside them were Sweden's Industry Minister Ebba Busch, Defense Minister Pal Johnson, and representatives from dozens of Swedish defense companies. Translation: Europe's most advanced military manufacturers just arrived in Canada with checkbooks open, and what they said next sent shockwaves through Washington. In difficult times, you should really choose your friends wisely, Industry Minister Bush announced at Rideau Hall. And this is the reason Sweden is choosing Canada. Let that sink in for a moment. Sweden, Europe's defense manufacturing powerhouse, the nation that builds submarines and Gripen fighter jets, just told Canada they're not just friends anymore. They're partners, strategic partners, the kind who build weapon systems together. But here's where this story gets absolutely explosive. Dear viewers, between the moment Swedish royals landed in Ottawa and the time Prime Minister Carney met them at his office, something happened in Berlin that nobody saw coming. The German Navy, one of Europe's most sophisticated maritime forces, made a decision that will echo for decades. They chose Canada. Germany's procurement announcement came through Trade Minister Maninder Sidhu on Monday, and the numbers are staggering. At some point it was $7 billion. That's not a typo. Over 1 billion Canadian dollars for Lockheed Martin Canada's CMS 330 combat management system. The system currently protecting Canadian and NATO naval forces is now heading to Germany's fleet. Think about what just happened. Germany, the economic engine of Europe, looked at every defense contractor on Earth and said, "We want the Canadian system. Not American technology built in America, not European systems built in France or Britain. Canadian technology built in Canada, protecting German ships." But wait, because the story gets even better. You see that CMS 330 system? It's already in service with Canadian forces and NATO partners. It uses modular, open architecture design, meaning it integrates with multiple sensors, information systems, and weapons platforms. Germany didn't just buy a product, they bought into Canada's entire defense technology ecosystem. And here's the part that should terrify Trump's negotiating team. Remember when Trump threatened tariffs? Remember when Washington assumed economic pressure would force Canada to capitulate? Sweden and Germany just gave Canada something more powerful than any tariff threat: validation. European validation. Billion-dollar validation that Canada's defense sector isn't just viable, it's essential. The message to Washington is crystal clear. Threaten us economically, and we'll simply diversify our partnerships. With Europe, starting immediately. Now let's talk about what happened next in Ottawa, because this is where Swedish strategy gets absolutely brilliant. Prime Minister Carney and King Carl XVI Gustaf signed something called a Strategic Partnership Agreement. Sounds diplomatic, right? Bureaucratic? Nothing could be further from the truth. This new partnership links Canadian and Swedish sectors across clean energy, critical minerals, defense manufacturing, forestry, research, and life sciences. Translation: Sweden just integrated their economy with Canada's across every sector that matters in 21st century competition. But the real bombshell? Fighter jets. Swedish defense firm Saab builds the Gripen fighter jet. You know what Canada needs? Fighter jets. 88 of them, to be exact. And guess who was a finalist for that contract before it went to America's Lockheed Martin? Saab. But here's where Trump's tariff threats created an opportunity nobody expected. The Carney government ordered a review of the F-35 contract specifically in response to the tariff war with the United States. They haven't announced a decision yet. But Saab isn't waiting. They're already in talks with Bombardier and the Canadian government about assembling Gripen fighter jets in Canada. Let me repeat that because it's important. Sweden is considering building their advanced fighter jets in Canada, not selling them to Canada, building them in Canada with Canadian workers, creating thousands of Canadian jobs. The number Saab is floating, 10,000 jobs. 10,000 high-paying advanced manufacturing jobs in Canadian aerospace, and every single one of those jobs exists because Trump threatened tariffs, and Europe responded with investment. Industry Minister Melanie Joly said something on Tuesday that should make American negotiators very, very nervous. She stated publicly that Canada didn't get enough industrial benefits from the Lockheed Martin F-35 deal. Translation: Canada is open to alternatives, European alternatives, alternatives that create jobs in Canada, not America. Think about the strategic implications for a moment. Canada currently plans to buy 88 F-35s from Lockheed Martin. 16 are already committed, but 72 remain under review. If even half of those shift to Swedish Gripen jets built in Canada with Bombardier partnership, you're looking at 10,000 Canadian jobs, billions in domestic aerospace investment, and a fundamental restructuring of North American defense supply chains. Washington thought tariffs would give them leverage. Instead, they handed Canada an excuse to diversify away from American dependence. But there's another layer to this that most analysts are missing entirely. Sweden wasn't neutral when they came to Canada, they came as NATO members. The newest NATO members actually breaking centuries of neutrality specifically because of Russian aggression in Ukraine. And the first country to ratify Sweden's NATO application? Canada. King Carl XVI Gustaf mentioned this directly at Rideau Hall. Canada was the first country to ratify Sweden's application to join NATO, he said. As Arctic nations, we share a vital role in addressing our global challenges in the region and keeping it secure. Translation: Sweden remembers who supported them when it mattered, and they're repaying that support with industrial partnership, defense contracts, and economic integration. This is how real diplomacy works, not tariff threats, not economic coercion, mutual respect, shared values, and strategic alignment. And while Trump threatens Canada publicly, Sweden and Germany are signing billion-dollar deals privately. Now here's where this story connects to something much bigger than just defense contracts. The Swedish delegation didn't just bring government ministers. They brought representatives from dozens of Swedish companies. This isn't about one weapon system or one fighter jet contract. This is about fundamentally reorienting Swedish business toward the Canadian market. Why? Because Sweden looked at the instability of American politics, the unpredictability of Trump's tariff threats, and made a calculated decision. Partner with the stable, predictable country that shares your values, the one that ratified your NATO membership first, the one that doesn't threaten allies with economic warfare. They chose Canada. And they're not alone. Germany's billion-dollar naval contract isn't an isolated decision. It's part of a pattern. European nations are watching Trump threaten America's closest neighbor and asking themselves a very simple question. If he'll do this to Canada, what will he do to us? The answer: they're hedging, they're diversifying, they're building partnerships with middle powers who won't weaponize trade agreements or threaten allies with tariffs. Countries like Canada. Dear viewers, something fundamental shifted this week in Ottawa. Sweden's longest reigning monarch, King Carl XVI Gustaf, doesn't make 3-day state visits for ceremonial purposes. Germany's Navy doesn't award billion-dollar contracts as diplomatic gestures. These are strategic decisions by serious nations responding to serious instability. And that instability, it's coming from Washington. Think about what Europe is witnessing right now. Trump threatens Canada with 25% tariffs. Carney responds by reviewing the F-35 contract. Sweden offers to build fighter jets in Canada instead. Germany awards a billion-dollar naval contract to Canadian technology. And all of this happens within the same week Swedish royals are signing strategic partnership agreements in Ottawa. The message to American policymakers should be deafening. Economic coercion creates opportunities for your competitors. I'll be commercial, but here's the part of this story that should worry Washington most. Canada isn't just accepting European partnerships, they're enthusiastically embracing them. Industry Minister Joly publicly stated Canada wants more jobs from defense contracts. Prime Minister Carney stood beside Swedish royalty and celebrated their strategic partnership that extends from defense to trade to the environment and beyond. This isn't reluctant diversification. This is active pursuit of alternatives to American dependence. And it's unfolding right now. Billion-dollar contracts being signed, fighter jet production talks accelerating, real deals with real consequences. Think about the Saab Bombardier partnership for a moment. Bombardier, Canada's aerospace giant, teaming up with Saab, the Swedish firm that builds some of the world's most lethal fighter jets. Together, they're not just talking about cooperation. They're discussing building Gripen aircraft on Canadian soil, aircraft that could replace American F-35s in Canada's fleet. Let that reality settle in. American jets, replaced by European aircraft built in Canada, creating Canadian jobs, all because Trump threatened tariffs. But it goes beyond just production. Saab and Bombardier already partner on the Global Eye, early warning surveillance aircraft. Those planes are manufactured in Canada and sent to Sweden for sensor installation. Saab recently announced they want to do more of that work in Canada. Translation: Swedish defense companies are moving operations to Canada. Not from Canada, to Canada. Every threat Trump makes accelerates this trend. Every tariff warning sends another European company looking for stable North American partnerships. And Canada, professional, predictable Canada, is standing ready with open arms. When Carney sat down with Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson to sign that strategic partnership agreement, they weren't just talking about trade, they were talking about high-quality jobs spreading across both countries. Supply chains getting stronger through joint research and information sharing. Skills training that creates careers, not just positions. But buried in that agreement is one phrase that reveals everything about what's really happening here. One phrase that should make Washington pay attention: Arctic and Euro-Atlantic collective security. Sweden and Canada aren't just trading partners. They're Arctic neighbors. They're NATO allies. They're democratic nations committed to collective defense. And they're watching Russian aggression in Ukraine while Trump threatens to abandon NATO commitments. The subtext is impossible to miss. If America retreats from collective security, Sweden and Canada will strengthen it together. This is the diplomatic equivalent of building a backup plan. Europe is watching Trump's unpredictability and asking, what if America isn't reliable? And the answer they're landing on is partnerships with countries like Canada who demonstrate consistency, stability, and commitment to shared values. Germany's billion-dollar naval contract proves they're not just asking the question, they're acting on the answer. Now let's talk about timing, because it matters enormously. The German naval procurement announcement came Monday. Swedish royals arrived Tuesday. The strategic partnership was signed Tuesday afternoon. And all of this happened while Trump's tariff threats are still active. While the F-35 review is ongoing. While American negotiators are presumably trying to pressure Canada into submission. Instead of submission, Europe gave Canada validation. $1 billion validation, strategic partnership validation, fighter jet production validation. If you're an American negotiator watching this unfold, you should be terrified, because every threat your president makes drives Canada deeper into European partnerships. Partnerships that replace American products with European alternatives. Alternatives built in Canada, employing Canadian workers, strengthening Canadian supply chains. Trump wanted leverage. He created diversification instead. And here's the final twist that makes this story absolutely perfect. Canada's decision to review the F-35 contract was publicly framed as a response to American tariff threats. Saab's decision to consider Canadian production was publicly announced during a Swedish royal visit. Germany's naval contract was publicly celebrated by Canadian ministers. None of this is happening in backrooms. This is public diplomacy. Strategic signaling? A message sent directly to Washington: threaten us, and we'll find alternatives, publicly, with your allies, starting immediately. The pattern is identical across every conversation. European officials reference Trump's tariff threats, express concern about American reliability, and ask if Canada can offer alternatives. Canada's answer is always the same: yes, and we'll respect our partnerships while doing it. If you're wondering how this story ends, here's what happens next. The F-35 review concludes. If Canada shifts even a portion of that order to Swedish Gripen jets, you're looking at the biggest realignment of North American defense supply chains in generations. Germany's naval contract opens doors for more European procurement of Canadian systems. Saab establishes Canadian production facilities, creating thousands of aerospace jobs. And through it all, Trump's tariff threats hang in the air, driving every single one of these developments. This isn't just about fighter jets or naval systems. This is about the fundamental fragility of American influence when wielded as a weapon against allies. Europe is watching, Asia is watching, And they're all asking the same question. If America treats Canada this way, are we next? The answer is driving them toward partnerships with middle powers who won't threaten them economically. Countries that honor commitments, nations that build relationships instead of demanding submission. Countries like Canada. If you're following these shifts in real time, if you want to understand how Canada is positioning itself while Washington stumbles through trade wars, you're exactly where you need to be. Canada Next tracks these developments every single day, connecting the dots between tariff threats, defense contracts, and the fundamental realignment of Western partnerships. Because this story isn't over, it's just beginning.